And I'm going to tell you tonight my life story is a story of forgiveness. It's a story of compassion. It's a story of long-suffering. And God made it all possible that we could come and turn the ashes of a lot of brokenness into beauty. Isn't that something? I was 4 years old when I began going to visit my dad in prison. We would ride in my grandmother's old 49 Ford, and you didn't have to have seat belts back then. So I would stand up beside my mom, and we'd sing all the way down the road. And I used to could tell what we sang, but I think the prison system's made a bad word out of it, so I just don't even go there anymore. But on the way home, Mama would cry because she was leaving somebody she loved in prison, wanted to take him home. Age 6, a new prison. Caldwell Correctional, still the same building my dad slept in. Isn't that something? And there we would have to stand on the outside of the fence, and we would visit through the fence. We couldn't go inside the facility, and I can remember seeing so many people lined up on the fence, and sometimes when I go back there, I look at that fence, and it's a new fence now, but I think about all that. And the people would reach through the fence to touch their children or to try to touch their wife's face or her lips. And I would watch Daddy, and he'd never touch through the fence. You see, my dad didn't love me and Mom, and it was pretty evident. But as a 6-year-old, I began to realize we weren't a normal family. How many of you have children that are 6 or above? You are not kidding them. They see right through you if you're not letting them know you love them. They're smart at 6 years old. They're smart at 3 years old. At 6 years old, they begin to size up their family because they begin to be around other kids that have normal families. And we didn't have a normal family. Dad was arrested again and sent to a federal prison in Greenville, South Carolina. And he was there until I was about 13, about 4 years, a little less than 4 years. And I remember this particular day we were going to bring Daddy home. He had been there and he had served his time. And this had been my prayer every night of my life. God, could you help Daddy to love me and Mama? And could you help him not to ever go back to prison again? Oh, I wanted that more than anything. I wanted us just to be a normal family. You see, I had spent every weekend at that prison. My mama wouldn't miss a visit unless the roads just were closed. I knew what it was to wake up at 3 every morning and Mama say, hurry, get in the car. We're going to be late. We won't get our visit in. I remember pulling off the side of the road because we didn't have no money to eat on and us having a little deviled egg sandwich to eat on the way. All those memories I can go back to. Many of your families. I talked to a family last week. 300,000 miles on their van will hardly make it. They've been every weekend for 14 years to visit a daughter who's serving life in prison. Isn't that something? They're driven by the love they have for you. And that's why my mom never missed a visit. We arrived at the gate, and I remember the officer looking at us, and he said, Mr. Pennell left about an hour ago. He said with his wife. My dad was gone. And I can still hear, guys, my mom scream all the way to Taylorsville. I didn't even know if we was going to make it home. She was in such an emotional state. And I began to control my feelings towards my daddy, and God didn't have any part of this because I began to hate that man that had hurt us so bad. And I began to dwell on that, and I began to think about we didn't need him in our life, and why did he even ever come back around? I hoped I never saw him again as long as I lived. And the root of bitterness began to grow in my heart. Now, I want to stop there just a minute because I feel like tonight God's already told me something before I ever got up here. There's 16 chairs up here. I counted them. I believe there's 16 men who are so deep-rooted with bitterness in their heart that they need to act on it tonight. Now, you listen to me. You will never know God's plan for your life if you're entangled and ensnarled with unforgiveness and bitterness. I will never know what God had planned for me as a young person. I went to church every Sunday. I sang solos. I taught Sunday school at age 17, but I wore a mask, and I looked like I knew what I was doing, and I looked like I was in tune with God, and I did know God. But I went home at night, and all I could think about was, why do we have to live with Daddy always interrupting our life? Why is he always hovering over us? And that bitterness grew and entangled and ensnarled my life as a young person. And some of you here tonight need to get rid of that. So at Craigie, you can be what God wants you to be. There's lost men out there. There may be lost men in here, and probably are. But you will never be an effective witness to God. This is your mission field while you're here. So much happened in the days ahead. My dad had a brain infection. He had a stroke that pulled his mouth to the side pretty bad. He was continually battling heart trouble. And little by little, I saw a man who had a lot of wealth and had a lot of power, but was dying, literally dying. And I didn't want him to die without Jesus. For I believe there's a heaven and a hell, and to live here without Jesus and leave here is hell. And that was all I began to think about then, to see him so sick. So many things happened, but I want to tell you about in Colors Market. I don't know if any of you are from Wilkesboro, North Carolina, are you? I believe we've talked about that. And Colors Market was a good place to go buy meat, wasn't it? And you could go in there and get you a bologna and cheese sandwich made, or a cracker and cheese, and Daddy loved to go stand at the counter and eat him a sandwich. And that day he took me with him. I believe it was a divine appointment that day, because as he was trying to eat that sandwich, the food was sliding out of that mouth where there were no muscle control. And it was slobbering out the side of his mouth. And I began to see it run down his chin and down on his shirt and on down it. And I began to have compassion, like I read to you, over my father. And I believe for the first time in my life, God literally broke my heart over my daddy, the worst he had ever broke it. And I saw a man that was so pitiful that day. And I knew that if he was going to be saved, I had to start praying a different prayer, and I had to make sure I'd forgiven him for everything he'd ever done to me and Mama. And for I believe the first time I maybe saw Daddy through the eyes of Jesus more than I ever had that day.